Hey guys, thanks for dedicating some of your time to watch and hopefully learn a few things around injury prevention and the various considerations which feed into this concept. One thing to state up front is that we cannot prevent injuries from actually happening. We can only mitigate the risk. False advertising, I know. That isn't to say we can't make a huge difference in reducing this risk, and the purpose of this video is to equip you with the knowledge to make that difference.
What is injury prevention and what areas do we need to look at? Why are adolescents and teens more at risk? And the cycle of injury and how to break this.
So, injury prevention. I'm going to take you through the 11 areas that, when considered and good practices implemented, can help you reduce your risk of injury and, arguably more important, improve your performance.
Mobility. Don't let this be confused with the next point, flexibility. But when we talk about mobility, we're referring to joints, hips, ankles, shoulders, for example. Now, some people are more mobile than others in their joints, and lots of mobility is not always a good thing. Hypermobility, this is excessive mobility, can be a big risk for picking up certain types of injuries, in the same way that hypomobility, poor mobility, can be at risk for picking others. We're looking for a Goldilocks porridge here. It has to be just right, but generally speaking, if you're on the stiffer side, then mobility work around your joints is a good investment of time to make sure you can get into those tough positions without feeling like your hips are going to explode. We will take you through some stretches later in the video that will help to address this issue. Good mobility equals lower risk of injury.
Flexibility. When we talk about flexibility, we're referring to muscles. Now, this is a particularly big issue for the growing athlete, as I'll explain later on, but considering flexibility in isolation is missing a big piece of the puzzle. Yes, we want supple, elastic muscles, but we also need them to be strong. By endlessly stretching a muscle in the hope of reducing your risk of injury, you're neglecting the main function of the muscle, which is to produce force. That said, selecting the right stretches at the right time can be a great way to warm up for competition and also get you back to basics, ready to go again. Poor flexibility is higher at the risk of injury.
So, strength. As we've just said, strength is key to reducing injury risk. A tired, weak, stiff muscle has injury written all over it. The stronger we both in isolation when looking at one muscle group, like the hamstrings for instance, and as a whole system being able to transfer force through the body efficiently, the higher the likelihood of high performance and reduced risk of injury. The body will always find the weakest link, so remember this when in the gym or warming up for training. Focus on your weaknesses, not your strengths. If you are strong in your quads, focus on your hamstrings. If you are strong in your shoulders, focus on your core. We have to look at our bodies in their component parts, but also as a whole. Poor level of strength equals higher level of risk of injury.
Lifestyle. Are you looking after yourself? Are you spending a lot of time watching TV or on your Xbox? Lifestyle underpins many of these topics such as sleep and nutrition. But I'd encourage you to take a look at the demands of your life and try to affect change in the key areas that are going to impact your mental and physical health for the better. A healthy lifestyle equals a lower risk of injury.
So, nutrition. Does much of what you eat look beige? How much colour is there in your diet? Nutrition encompasses anything we are putting into our bodies. Think of yourself as a supercar. You wouldn't put red diesel in it when filling up, would you? Be mindful of the things you are putting in your bodies and think of it as fuel for competition and for the recovery after you've put in the hard yards. There are many complex diets out there which claim to have the magic formula, but in our eyes, a balanced diet with lots of colour will do the trick. You can get fancy with carb loading before a big weekend of games, or stacking up on the protein after training or gains to assist with recovery, but if you eat a consistent balanced diet, you won't go far wrong. Poor nutrition equals higher risk of injury.
Hydration. How much water should you drink depends on how much you weigh. For instance, a 60 kilogram person should drink at least 2 litres per day and a 90 kilo person around 3 litres per day. When exercising, we lose a large amount of fluid because of heavy breathing and sweat, so you should consider increasing your intake on days when you have a lot on your plate, exercise-wise. A useful technique, may or may not be possible in practice, is to weigh in and weigh out. For every kilogram lost in weight during a game, you should replace it with 1 litre of water. One final point is to emphasise the need for a well-hydrated body. Not only does hydration reduce the risk of soft tissue injuries such as muscle strains, but it has a huge impact on the brain and our decision making. This means that when dehydrated, we make poorer decisions, can get ourselves into positions or scenarios we wouldn't normally be in, which can lead to a higher risk of injury. Good hydration equals lower risk of injury.
Recovery. Recovery involves a multitude of factors: sleep, nutrition, mobility, hydration, amongst the others. The key thing is that we don't take it for granted, especially with the talented developing athletes that are asked to play sport every day of the week. There simply is no time for the body to recover fully in time it is given. When in state of fatigue, the body is at much of a higher risk of injury. Good recovery equals lower risk of injury.
Warm up and cool down. No longer is the old turn up, boots on, off we go mentality acceptable in sport across the board. The idea of warming up and cooling down is now a widely accepted concept, and by doing this one area well, you may have the biggest impact upon your injury risk out of all of the other topics. The aim of the warm up is to simply prepare the body in a gradual fashion for what it's about to endure in the match or training session. The body doesn't deal well with change, so you need to prepare it slowly and in a consistent, planned way that gets the muscles warm and the blood flowing. If you aren't sweating, you aren't warm, even in the middle of winter in England. We'll give you a basic warm-up and some stretches to do as part of a cool-down later on.
Workload. When we say workload, we mean everything that goes into the mixing pot on a weekly basis. This can be any of the following: game time, training time, PE classes at school, time taken walking around the shops, driving time, revision time. Anything which has a metabolic cost on our bodies can be seen as load. Some areas obviously count much more than others. For instance, distant run at high speed versus time sat in a car driving to training, but it should all be considered nonetheless. The body is amazingly durable, but it takes time to build that durability. If we go from 10 to 100 in no time at all, something is going to pop. Consider anything that is going into the pot, and then if needed, make some tough decisions to take things out that perhaps don't have the same level of importance. Spikes in workload equals spikes in injury risk.
Conditioning. Fitness. The better we are at dealing with the demands of the game for the whole duration of the game, the less likely we are to pick up injury. It's absolutely no coincidence that most injuries in many sports are picked up in the last 10 or 20 minutes. If we're still moving like a gazelle late into the game, we are in full control of our body. Without this control, we risk injury. Higher levels of conditioning equals lower risk of injury.
Sleep. Sleep is the number one and most undervalued aspect of recovery. The whole purpose of sleep is around recovery, both for the brain and neurological system and the rest of the body. Obviously not as easy to get adequate sleep for those of you with young children and developing athletes. The best thing you can do to reduce injury risk is to encourage sleep.
Why are adolescents and teens at more risk? Number one, lack of conditioning to the demands of the game. As much as we may take the mickey out of the seasoned pro who counts the years they've played the game in decades rather than years, one thing they are is fit for purpose. Even when the body is starting to creak at the edges, it's so accustomed to the demands of the sport that these players are able to keep going regardless. Obviously, there's a sweet spot to this. But I suppose my point is that young aspiring players have a lot of attributes, which is why they are pulled from pillar to post by different teams and sports. But one thing they don't have is specificity, and generally speaking, conditioning for the demands of adult hockey. There isn't a huge amount we can do to mitigate this, but an acceptance of the increased toll adult sport can take on a growing body is worth noting. Providing ways to bridge the gap using focused conditioning sessions and alongside allowing adequate recovery between sessions is a good way to go.
So number 2, imbalance between strength and flexibility during phases of accelerated growth. We see the skeletal system grow at great speed. This increases the length and width of bones at a speed that the muscles, nerves and other structures struggle to keep up with. The unfortunate picture you can be left with is a tight muscle which are being encouraged to grow and are inherently weak. The combination of weakness and tightness places a large risk of injury on the individual. Again, in terms of what we can do, this is physical development process and the body will do it at its own rate. However, by utilising stretching techniques at the right time of the week, such as post-training or on days off, alongside adopting principles of strength development, again at the right times, can help us to bridge the gap and mitigate some of the risk whilst in this period of transition.
Number 3, transitioning from youth to adult hockey. There are certain facets in hockey and most sports which are drastically increased as you make the transition from youth to adult participation. Speed. The speed of the game is much faster. To keep up with play, players will have to run at higher speeds, more often and with less recovery. Volume. The amount of distance run in an adult game of hockey will be much higher than that of a junior match. Impacts. The rough and tumble in a match is now, with players that are generally speaking, heavier than in junior games. Reaction time. There will be less time to react in an adult game, meaning players have to change direction much more aggressively and make quick decisions about positioning. Force. The ball will be hit with much more force. I'm sure there are many more differences, but the examples I've highlighted can have a dramatic difference on injury risk. The more we can prepare our children for the next step as they make their way through the pathway, the less injuries they'll pick up and the less impacted their blossoming careers will be.
Cycle of injury and how to break it. Have you ever rolled your ankle before? If so, has it happened again? I imagine most of you older generation can relate to this. The ankle is the most common example of this, but it happens all over the body and it might not even be happening with the same injury.
The cycle of injury is this. An initial injury happens to some part of the body. You rest, recover in the way you've been told. When you feel the pain or swelling is reduced, you start to get back into sport. You go back to the start, rest and recover, then try the process again. Most of the time you'll get out of this cycle eventually, and if you're lucky enough, you'll get back to the level of sport you're used to. This doesn't always happen, and in our opinion is one of the biggest reasons why people fall out of their sport.
To be able to break this cycle, we need to add a stage, rehabilitation. So what happens when you get injured is that you may have an injured structure, like a ligament for example, which will heal in its own time, and we generally are a good judge of how that direct issue is feeling. The thing we don't factor in is the fact we haven't moved properly in X amount of days and the effect of deconditioning to the muscles surrounding this issue. We also fail to recognise that there is a pain, there is inhibition. This means that the pain causes muscles that aren't directly involved to work less efficiently.
This is where rehab comes in. By going through a logical, graduated rehab plan which focuses on the conditioning of the muscles and the limb as a whole, alongside reducing inhibition and increasing control of an area, we can reduce the chances of re-injury occurring drastically. This is also why we quite often pick up a different injury when returning to sport. Our bodies are out of shape and need to be prepared for our sport. Quite often we pick up where we left off, and this is a mistake. In the same way we consider rehab using a graduated plan, returning to sport should be considered the same. If you jump straight back in, you can expect the same outcome.
In terms of knowing how to put these plans together, that's where we come in. A few sessions led by an experienced physio can avoid months of back and forth yo-yoing between being fit and being injured. Do it once and do it well.
Time for the warm-up. Right, let's get into the practical side of things now. You've listened to me waffle on about the theory.
Really?
One thing to say at this stage is that if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to get in touch and we'll do our best to help out. Just use the contact details at the end of the video to get in touch. This way.
Okay, so a suggestion that we've got for yourselves is you could start with a 2 to 3 minute jog. Then what I'll do is I'll take you through some dynamic stretches and there will be a demonstration on screen for you. Then we'll look at the mechanics of running and a warm up for this. Then at this point, maybe you can take yourself through some hockey specific exercises, and I'm sure you've got many suggestions for that. And then what we'll do is we'll look at mobility exercises to do with the hip, shoulder and the thoracic spine, so the mid portion of your back. Heel kicks, high knees, Lunge and rotate. Knuckle drags. Side lunge. Over the gate. High skip. Low skip. Ankling. Switches. A run. Acceleration, deceleration, weave, glute stretch, hip flexor stretch, adductor stretch, hamstring stretch, quad stretch, pec stretch, lat stretch, posterior shoulder stretch, tricep stretch, reach and rotate, extension.
Thanks for your time, guys, and well done for investing the time in trying to learn about how you might be able to make a few little tweaks to make a massive difference to your risk of injury. As I said earlier, don't hesitate to get in touch with any questions. You can catch us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn using the handle @Move4Physio. You can email us at info@move4physio.com, and you can call us on 01604 935 678, or you can visit our website move4physio.com, which has a number of resources that may help you out with exercise selection. You can also book an appointment online with us in 60 seconds, so if you'd prefer not to speak to someone in the booking process, go and look at our website. Best of luck with everything, guys, and thanks for listening. Cheers.